On January 13, 2012, at 7 p.m., a massive cruise liner set sail from a port near Rome. The voyage of this sea giant was supposed to last 7 days, with stops in Barcelona, Palermo, and Palma. A total of 4,229 people embarked on this journey. It was one of the largest liners in the world, measuring 290 meters in length, which was 20 meters longer than the Titanic. The ship had 17 decks and a total height of 30 meters. Recently launched, it was equipped with the latest navigation technology. Its engineering solutions made the liner one of the safest constructions. However, as you might guess, this story wouldn't be featured on our channel if the ship had been as reliable and safe as the engineers intended. Welcome back to my true crime podcast. And what surprising role did a woman play in this entire tragedy? Make sure to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and leave a comment below. Your support greatly helps me and allows the channel to continue running. Today, I will tell you about one of the most controversial maritime disasters in modern history, which occurred in the Tyrrhenian Sea. The massive liner Costa Concordia housed a full-size theater, 4 pools, several restaurants, and its modern infrastructure was more akin to a small city than a ship. This state-of-the-art vessel was launched in 2006, built using the latest technology. The engineering principle behind this giant was simple: a very long and wide ship with a low center of gravity, compensating for its incredible height. Ships built this way are considered very reliable. The ship was captained by the experienced sailor, Captain Francesco Schettino. He had been the captain of the Costa Concordia for 6 years, navigating the same routes planned for this cruise multiple times. It's important to note that on a ship, the captain is the ultimate authority. The captain is the highest-ranking and most trusted representative of the ship owner. He bears full responsibility for everything that happens on the vessel, including its safe operation, the safety of the crew, the preservation of the ship, and the cargo it carries. This responsibility is inescapable. It is the law. But let's delve a bit into the character of our captain. Francesco was born on November 14, 1960, in Castellammare di Stabia, a suburb south of Naples. He grew up in a family of sailors. His maternal ancestors had been ship owners for generations. Francesco's father and grandfather were both captains. In 1982, Francesco Schettino graduated from the Maritime Institute with excellent grades. He then served for 8 years on passenger ships of the Italian Navy before moving to commercial shipping. He worked on the ferry Tirrenia and was the captain of an oil tanker. Joining the cruise industry in 2002, he landed a position with Carnival Corporation. After working as the head of the company's security service for 4 years, Francesco was appointed captain of the Costa Concordia in 2006. When the Costa Concordia was launched, something interesting happened. According to maritime tradition, a bottle of champagne must be broken against the hull of a new ship. This is a very ancient tradition. Champagne replaced red wine, symbolizing sacrificial blood. In ancient times, a ship was considered a living entity, even a deity, which required sacrifices. The Vikings would sprinkle the blood of slain prisoners on their new ships. Christian nations replaced the blood with red wine in memory of the Last Supper. However, the bottle of champagne thrown at the new liner's hull did not break, which sailors took as a very bad omen. According to journalists from a well-known Italian newspaper, Captain Schettino had earned a reputation as a ladies' man and a breaker of rules during his 6 years at the helm. By 2006, Captain Schettino had already been involved in dangerous incidents at sea. A month before the events in question, while in Marseille, he ignored Port Authority orders and took his ship to sea during a severe storm. In 2008, while docking in Palermo, the Costa Concordia, under his command, rammed the harbor defenses, sustaining minor damage to the underwater part of the hull. But let's get back to the liner. The Costa Concordia was powered by 6 diesel generators with a total output of around 100,000 horsepower. These generators were located in the hold below the waterline. It's evening 9:15 p.m. The ship had been sailing on its planned course for an hour and a half and was approaching a small island called Giglio. It's common practice for liners to sail close to shore during such cruises. At these moments, passengers can enjoy views of the islands in addition to the endless sea vistas, even if the islands are not scheduled stops. The Costa Concordia had passed this way before, most recently on August 14, 2011. But this time, Captain Schettino decided to bring the ship much closer to the rocky shore. Skipping ahead a bit, a later investigation by maritime experts, based on data from the ship's automatic identification system, revealed that for some reason, as he approached the shore, Francesco miscalculated the turn. This system records the ship's location in real time, its speed, and all main technical characteristics, which can later be downloaded and analyzed. At 9:20 p.m., most passengers were in the theater, where a new variety show was being performed. By 9:43 p.m., the ship accelerated to 16 knots, equivalent to 29 km/h. This is very fast for a 100,000-ton vessel cruising near the shore. Critically close to the coast, the captain began to change course. At this moment, the liner was only 180 meters from the island, in very shallow water with a depth of about 2.5 meters. Meanwhile, dinner service had begun on the Costa Concordia. Unaware of any impending danger, passengers were seated in the restaurants, awaiting their orders. Pleasant music played in the background as slow conversations flowed. Evening, 9:44 p.m. The captain realized that the ship was too close to the shore and attempted to steer to deeper waters by turning right. However, given the speed at which the vessel was traveling, this maneuver couldn't be done safely or quickly enough, and the liner struck a reef. Passengers inside the ship felt a massive jolt. For a moment, the liner lurched to the side, followed by a prolonged, intense vibration throughout the hull, similar to the shaking of a minor earthquake. The captain managed to avoid the bow from hitting the reef, but the aft section of the Costa Concordia, still moving along its disastrous path, couldn't turn in time. The side of the liner scraped along the reef, creating a 50-meter gash in the hull. Additionally, a massive chunk of the reef, the size of a car, became lodged in the ship's structure. The question arises, why did the captain decide to sail so dangerously close to the shore, especially at night, when he had already navigated this route several times before? One of the theories behind Francesco Schettino's fateful decision, surprisingly, involves a woman. Despite being married with children, the captain had invited a special passenger on this cruise. It appears this was Francesco's friend, model and dancer Domenica Cimordan. Domenica Cimordan and Francesco Schettino were linked by not only friendly but also romantic relations. Seemingly wanting to impress Domenica with his cruise operations and his authority over the ship, the captain, in violation of all navigation rules and in the darkness of night, turned off most of the liner's sensors and systems, taking control himself. Unfortunately, the crew could not influence his decision. As mentioned earlier, the captain's word is law, and his orders must be followed. Through the gaping hole, tons of water began to flood into the ship. The liner was not designed to withstand such severe damage. The stern of the Costa Concordia was divided into several watertight compartments. According to the engineer's calculations, even if 2 of these compartments were flooded due to a breach, the ship would still be able to stay afloat. However, the problem was that the 50-meter gash meant that at least 3, possibly even 4 compartments would be flooded. As the ship took on more water, it began to list more severely to one side. At this moment, a passenger turned on their camera and started filming the unfolding events. Here are those remarkable shots. The liner sustained a breach on its port side, where the diesel generators were located. The power units, situated below the waterline, were immediately flooded after the collision and shut down. As a result, the Costa Concordia lost power, and the lights went out along with the engines. The crew, in a state of panic, tried to understand what had happened and how serious the damage was. A conversation took place between the captain and his assistant. The Costa Concordia struck the rocks near the island of Giglio. Seal the watertight bulkheads in the bow section. We're listing heavily to starboard. The ship is losing propulsion due to the flooding of the engine room. The list is worsening. The list is worsening. The list is increasing. The list is increasing. Seal the bulkheads in the engine room. The ship's speed quickly dropped, and eventually the liner came to a complete stop. The Costa Concordia began drifting away from the shore into open sea. The passengers were terrified. Due to the rapidly increasing list, people were slipping and falling as they tried to quickly make their way to the exits from the rooms where they had been when the collision occurred. There was a scramble, and all of this was happening almost in complete darkness. After some time, the emergency lighting came on. Immediately, an announcement from the captain's bridge echoed through the loudspeakers on the liner. There has been a power outage. Everything is under control. But all those passengers who had felt the impact and the vibrations, and who saw the ship's list increasing, understood that something much more serious than a power outage had occurred. The crew clumsily attempted to conceal the true extent of the accident. Later, reviewing the actions of the crew and the captain, an expert explained that in this situation, Francesco Schettino should have calmly announced a muster of everyone on board at the lifeboats. The captain, to avoid causing panic, should have calmly told the passengers that indeed there was a power failure on the ship, and as a precaution, the crew requested everyone to proceed to the lifeboats. But such an announcement was not made. It was also revealed that the captain did not send a distress signal to the rescue services on shore. They learned about the situation on the Costa Concordia from passengers who began calling emergency services. After receiving several such calls, the rescuers from the port contacted the liner and requested information about the situation. But what did our captain do? He ordered the entire crew to inform the shore services that there had been only a power failure and nothing more. These details come from the testimony of the captain's assistant, to whom Schettino directly gave the order to respond to the rescuers in this manner, refusing their offered assistance. At 10:33 p.m., with the engines off, the Costa Concordia was pushed by wind and waves 2.5 kilometers away from the island. Shortly thereafter, a change in the wind, blowing at 37 kilometers per hour, began to turn the drifting liner sideways and slowly push it back toward the shore. The vast amount of water that had flooded the ship started shifting from the port side to the starboard side, opposite to the direction of the wind. The ship's list to the right grew more severe, causing it to rock from side to side. Confused passengers made their way to the upper decks, where a large crowd had already gathered. By this time, the captain finally decided to announce the emergency situation. An announcement blared over the liner's loudspeakers. "We are sinking! Everyone proceed to the muster stations by the lifeboats." In such cases, all passengers are supposed to gather at designated muster stations. The Costa Concordia was equipped with lifeboats located on the fourth deck, with the muster stations nearby. When embarking on a sea journey, all passengers undergo a brief safety drill that includes instructions on how to proceed to the muster stations in case of an emergency. The problem was that this drill had been scheduled for the next morning, so none of the passengers knew where to go. On board the Costa Concordia were passengers who had cruised on the ship before. These experienced travelers helped the confused and frightened passengers find their way to the muster stations. Hundreds of people gathered at these points, waiting to board the lifeboats. But the crew hesitated, allowing no one to board. When asked why the boarding had not started, the sailors responded to the anxious crowd that they were waiting for the captain's order. One of the passengers described the situation at the muster stations as absolute chaos, with everyone scared and confused. The wind continued to push the liner closer to the shore, and eventually, the Costa Concordia ran aground near the island. At this point, realizing that the situation had become even more dangerous for the passengers, Captain Schettino finally gave the order to lower the lifeboats and begin the evacuation. In a state of panic and chaos, with people shouting and jostling, the passengers rushed to the lifeboats. The ship was equipped with 26 lifeboats, each with a capacity of 150 people. According to maritime regulations, all passengers should be evacuated from a distressed vessel within 30 minutes of the evacuation announcement. People, regardless of gender and age, desperately tried to reach the lifeboats. Families with small children tried to signal to others that they should be allowed to board the lifeboats first by lifting their children above their heads. But it wasn't like in the movies. Women and children were not given priority. The first to board were those who were stronger and more aggressive. Crew members are specially trained to handle lifeboats in emergency situations. It's crucial in such moments to maintain calm and order, which is the first responsibility of the crew. Besides the ordeal of being on a distressed vessel, just boarding a lifeboat can be very frightening. These lifeboats are extremely cramped, resembling a sealed can packed with passengers. Imagine all of this happening at night, in complete darkness, with the sirens blaring. The ocean waves are crashing far below, and you have no idea what will happen next. And to make matters worse, no safety drill had been conducted. As the lifeboats were lowered into the water, people cheered loudly when the lifeboats touched the surface. Those who managed to get on the lifeboats and saw the remaining passengers still on deck understood how lucky they were. From a distance, the scale of the tragedy and the severe list of the liner became evident. By the time of the evacuation, the shore was only 90 meters away from the distressed ship. The seabed near the island of Giglio rises sharply, and the Costa Concordia, caught on a reef under the pressure of the wind, began to tilt even more to one side. While launching lifeboats from the port side was difficult but possible, on the starboard side, where the tilt angle was increasing, it became a significant problem. Lifeboats are lowered into the water with special winches, but if the tilt angle exceeds 20 degrees, the lifeboats cannot be lowered without hitting the side of the ship. This is exactly what happened on the starboard side of the already heavily listed Concordia. Many lifeboats became jammed. The ones that still worked were lowered by the crew, sliding them down the ship's hull. Sailors tried to push the lifeboats away with poles, but it did little good. The passengers, who had believed they were saved, were ordered to return from the boats back onto the sinking liner. By this time, the list had increased so much that water began to flood the deck where the lifeboats were located. The first batch of lifeboats, having successfully reached the shore and unloaded passengers, was returning to rescue those still on board. According to the passengers' recollections, water was flooding the deck where they were waiting for the lifeboats to return. It was terrifying. People from the starboard side, which was now raised above the water, tried to move to the port side, where the rescue boats were arriving. They had to move in complete darkness, as the emergency lighting had failed by then. The corridors inside the liner were tilted so much that the floor had become almost a wall, forcing people to crawl, gripping onto railings and ledges. At some point, the ship, having taken on a critical amount of water, suddenly keeled over and fell onto its side. Passengers who hadn't reached the starboard side were trapped inside the sinking liner. Meanwhile, a Coast Guard helicopter using night vision systems was attempting to locate the distressed Costa Concordia. The pilots circled the crash site for a long time but couldn't find the ship. Only after some time did they manage to get their bearings and see the horrific scene of the wreck on their monitors. They had been informed that the liner had run aground. They were not prepared for the horrific sight that unfolded before their eyes on the monitors. Such a scene can shock even seasoned rescuers. The ship was already lying completely on its side on the reef, and the water was rising rapidly. According to the memories of a young couple, Mark and Sarah Plett, who were trapped on the starboard side and preparing to jump into the water, the sea was 3.5 meters below them. Rescue boats couldn't approach their side, leaving people with no choice but to jump into the dark waters of the ocean in hopes of survival. Mark and Sarah jumped. The water was very cold, and Sarah immediately struggled to catch her breath. Following the young couple, around 200 other passengers also jumped into the water. People tried to swim away from the liner as quickly as possible, fearing that the rapidly sinking ship might fall on them or drag them down with the vortex they believed would form as the ship submerged. The water temperature was 15 degrees Celsius. They had to swim 90 meters to the shore. At this temperature, there is a risk of hypothermia if a person remains in the water for about an hour. A family of 4 named Nennies found themselves trapped inside the sinking liner. According to their recollections, they prayed and said their goodbyes to each other when suddenly, as if from nowhere, a rope ladder was thrown down to them. Upon the appearance of the ladder, people seemed to lose their minds, pushing, shouting, and practically climbing over each other in a desperate attempt to reach the life-saving steps. Night. 1:45 a.m. 4 hours had passed since the Costa Concordia collided with the reef. While the crew was doing everything they could to save the passengers, Captain Francesco Schettino had already left the distressed ship an hour earlier and made it to shore. Later, explaining how he ended up on shore, abandoning his ship, Francesco Schettino claimed that he accidentally fell into a lifeboat while directing the evacuation. According to maritime law, the captain is the last to leave a sinking ship. Upon learning that Francesco had left the distressed liner, the head of the Coast Guard Rescue Service radioed the captain. Here's the translation of part of their conversation from Italian. Yes, good evening, Captain DeFalco. Could you please tell me your name? It's Captain Schettino, Captain. Schettino? Yes. Listen, Schettino. There are people trapped on board. Now get into your lifeboat and head to the ship. There's a ladder on the starboard side right under the ship's bow. You will climb up this ladder onto the ship, and you will report back to me and all the passengers there. Is that clear? I'm recording this conversation, Schettino. The captain's colleagues could not justify Schettino's actions. It was his moral duty to stay on the ship during the disaster, oversee the evacuation, and lead the rescue efforts. For a seafarer, such behavior is unimaginable and can only be described with strong nautical language. Meanwhile, hundreds of people were fighting for their lives, using ropes to descend from the stern to the lifeboats shuttling between the liner and the shore. By this time, the Nani's family finally managed to escape from the sinking ship's bowels. They climbed up to the deck using a ladder. According to the couple's recollections, it was very high and extremely frightening. They descended in the dark, along a thin rope with their feet constantly slipping off the side of the ship. It would have taken just one person in this long chain to fall, and everyone would have plunged into the water, inevitably dying, trapped between the liner's hull and the approaching lifeboats. Fortunately, the Nani's family made it into a lifeboat and safely reached the shore. However, not everyone was so lucky. There were casualties, though the exact number was not yet known at that time. On the morning of January 14th, the victim count was conducted. 17 people were declared dead, and 15 were missing. After thoroughly examining this catastrophic situation, experts agreed that it could have ended much worse. The Costa Concordia disaster resulted from a series of events that combined to cause one of the largest maritime catastrophes in modern history. The first mistake was directing the ship into the narrow strait near Giglio Island at a speed of 16 knots, which was too fast for such a large liner close to the shore. The seabed rises sharply here, and at that speed, the captain couldn't maneuver in time, tearing the ship's side open on the rocks. If the Concordia had been moving slower, they likely would have managed the maneuver, and the liner would have escaped with just a scratch on its hull. Before we delve into the fate of the disgraced captain, let's examine the actions taken to address the aftermath of the disaster. A massive salvage operation, the largest in human history, was launched to raise the ship. This was an unprecedented task. The enormous ship, weighing around 140,000 tons, had to be lifted from the seabed and maneuvered along the rocky coastline to a dismantling site. To achieve this, unique metal structures were built on the seabed, which was reinforced with concrete. Using numerous cables as thick as lampposts, the liner was lifted to an upright position. Huge metal flotation tanks, each the size of an 11-story building, were attached to both sides of the ship. The rescue divers took significant risks. They installed the structures to which the cables would be attached to lift and stabilize the Concordia. The ship was resting on a reef slope and could have slid into deeper water at any moment, dragging the divers into the abyss. It is noteworthy that a special service ensured the safety of the local flora and fauna before the construction and reinforcement of the reef's foundation. For example, large mussels were collected and relocated from under the Costa Concordia's hull to another area. This effort was remarkable. The salvage operation was a success, a triumph of engineering. According to media reports, the cost of the salvage operation for the ship owner was 600 million euros, equal to the value of the liner itself. On September 16, 2013, at 9 a.m., the operation to raise the Costa Concordia began. By September 17th, the 19-hour operation was completed. The ship was brought to an upright position using rollers, 36 steel cables, and a special platform built at a depth of 30 meters. During the lifting, after a thorough search, the remains of 2 bodies were found, having been underwater for 20 months. Identifying them without DNA testing was impossible. On February 1, 2014, during the work to attach air tanks to the ship, a diver lost his life. On July 23, 2014, the process of towing the ship to the port of Genoa began. By July 27th, it was docked in the port, where it was dismantled. The dismantling of the hull took 22 months, and by July 7, 2017, the ship was completely dismantled. Now, let's return to the captain. The public was shocked by the tragedy. Footage from passengers' cameras circulated throughout the country, showing the horror, chaos, and disorganization that reigned on the Concordia during the sinking. Captain Francesco Schettino was rightly blamed for everything. The captain, whose primary duty was the safety of passengers in the ship, fled at the most critical moment, leaving people on board. The mistakes made by the captain became public knowledge. Despite undeniable evidence of his guilt, Francesco did not accept responsibility for the sinking of the Costa Concordia. As a result, the public dubbed Schettino the Captain Coward. Data from the black boxes showed that the captain took control of the ship 6 minutes before it struck the reef. He admitted that at the critical moment, he was on the phone and lost sight of the reef. He explained his delay in evacuation by saying he was waiting for the liner to drift to shallow waters, where he planned to begin rescuing passengers. To say that Captain Schettino's reputation was destroyed is an understatement. Francesco was blamed for the deaths of 32 people due to his own stupidity and arrogance. He was accused of cowardice during the sinking and of obstructing the investigation. By the time Francesco Schettino's trial concluded, he was called the most hated man in Italy. The captain claimed he was a victim of media persecution. Captain Schettino was charged with 32 counts of involuntary manslaughter, causing a maritime disaster, abandoning ship, and failing to cooperate with rescue services. Besides the captain, 5 other crew members were also convicted. The charges ranged from involuntary manslaughter to negligence, and they received sentences ranging from 18 months to 3 years. And despite Francesco Schettino's lawyers claiming their client was made a scapegoat, the captain immediately agreed to a deal when it was offered by the prosecution. Schettino asserted that despite the crash, his actions saved many lives after the ship struck the rocks. He continued to maintain his stance, blaming malfunctioning radar systems for not detecting the reef in time. Ultimately, Francesco Schettino was sentenced to 16 years in prison after a 19-month trial. He lost everything: his career, marriage, colleagues' respect, and his freedom. Surprisingly, for Costa Cruises, the company that owned the liner, Francesco Schettino had been a symbol of an experienced captain. He had 10 years of impeccable service. He even appeared in the company's advertisements, shown confidently navigating his ship through the Hudson with the Manhattan skyline in the background. Friends, let's discuss this story in the comments below the video. I read all the opinions and try to respond when possible. It will be interesting to share our thoughts on this tragedy. Also, I want to remind you, if you haven't seen our previous episodes yet, make sure to check them out. If you found this episode interesting, please like the video, leave a comment, and click the bell icon. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Your support means a lot to me. See you in the next stories.